So we're now ready to start our neckband, and we're going to change to a larger needle size. So I've got my new needle here. The reason why we're using a larger needle than the body is because in our linen stitch neckband we're slipping stitches every row. The increased number of slipped stitches contracts the gauge, hence the reason why a larger needle is used. We're going to start with our setup row, and for that we are going to purl one stitch and then slip one stitch with the yarn at the back of our work. So we'll purl one stitch and then slip one stitch with the yarn at the back, like so. Bring the yarn through to the front and we'll repeat those two stitches. Purl one stitch, slip one stitch with the yarn at the back of our work. We're going to continue all the way around the neckband, and I'll see you at the end. So we're finishing off our setup row with a slip one purlwise with our yarn wrapped around the back of our work. Now we're going to turn our work and we'll be adding in our second colour, which is actually our main colour for this band. And we start off with a knit stitch. So what we're doing is we're going to do two right side rows, the first in our second colour yarn, and then, or let's call this colour A, and then we'll be doing a right sided row with colour B. So doing our first right sided row with colour A, we're going to knit one stitch and then slip one stitch with the yarn in front of our work. Knit one stitch, slip one stitch with the yarn in front. So we're just going to repeat that along the row. So we're now knitting another right side row using colour B. So we're starting this row with a slip stitch with the yarn in front, followed by a knit stitch. And again, slip stitch with the yarn in front, followed by a knit stitch. What you will notice is that any stitch on your left hand needle that is of colour A will be slipped with the yarn in front, and the next stitch, which is colour B, will be knitted. That's one way to know that you are correctly knitting and slipping the right stitches. The other thing that you will notice is that any stitch that was slipped in the previous row will have a wrap in front of it, and for this row any slipped stitches are knitted. So again, I'll see you at the end of the row. So we've got to the end of our second right side row using colour B. The way we can tell which colour we've just knitted, because obviously with the alternating stitch colours on our needle it might be hard to tell, but rather than looking at the colour of the stitches that's on your needle, look at what colour the wrap is below, immediately below the stitch. So if I'm picking up my wrap here, I can see that my wrap is the dark blue colour, and so that's how I'll know that I've just finished a blue row. Now we're going to turn our work and do 2 wrong-sided rows. With our wrong side facing, we're going to be purling stitches and slipping stitches with the yarn at the back of our work. What's important when you're turning your work is that you pick up your yarn in a way that has a nice tidy finish on the right side. So we're now back to working with colour A, which is this yarn. If I pick up my yarn like this without catching this darker B yarn in, you can see that on the back we won't have a nice tidy horizontal wrap. It will be pulled upwards, that wrap will be pulled upwards. So in order to catch the yarn so that the wrap is staying nice and horizontal, we need to make sure that we're picking our yarn up from under yarn B. So we're going to start off by slipping a stitch with the yarn at the back, like so, and purling a stitch. Again, you'll notice that the colours that are you'll notice that the stitch that we're slipping is the stitch of yarn B, and the stitch that we're working, which is purling on wrong side rows, is of the same colour as the yarn we're working with. So slip a stitch with the yarn in the back, purl a stitch. So we've got to the end of that row. We've just finished the first wrong side row in colour A, and this is what it looks like on the right side. Now we need to go back and do a wrong-sided row with colour B. So we'll slide our stitches to the end of the needle, and picking up colour B, we're going to knit another wrong-sided row. And this time we're starting with a purl stitch. So we're going to work the first stitch, which is also colour B, and we're going to slip the second stitch with the yarn at the back of our work for the second stitch, which is colour A. So we're working the first stitch by purling it, and then we're slipping the second stitch with the yarn at the back of our work. Purl, slip one stitch with the yarn at the back, and we'll work our way down to the end of our knitting again. So we've now finished our second wrong side row using colour B. We'll turn our work again, and then we're going to start over again doing 2 right-sided rows, first with colour A, then with colour B, and then we'll do 2 wrong side colour rows. Again, first with colour A and then with colour B. Whenever you turn your work, it's just important to make sure you're picking up the lower colour from behind your top colour that you've just used. That way, any wraps are going to stay nice and horizontal. So we've finished knitting our rows, and we're now ready to do our bind off row. We've just finished row 2 using our contrast colour yarn, And for our bind off row, rather than changing back to our main colour, we're going to bind off in our contrast colour yarn. We'll turn our work, and we're starting off with a slipped stitch followed by a purl stitch. So we're going to slip the stitch, sorry, with the yarn at the back, and then purl a stitch. When we've got the 2 stitches on our needle, we'll pass that stitch over. Our next stitch is another slip stitch with the yarn in the back, and again pass that 2nd stitch over. Purl, pass the stitch over, slip with the yarn at the back, pass the stitch over. As you're casting off, I just like to give the neckband a little stretch and just make sure that I'm casting off loose enough. We'll just do a few more stitches and then we'll have a look at what that looks like. Let's have a little look at our bind up edge close up. So what you can see here is the stitch that you slip will be smaller than the stitch that you knit. So that's to be expected. Don't be tempted to make your bind off too tight. When it's viewed from the right side, you'll get a nice scalloped edge to it. And I'll see you at the end of our bind off. So we've bound off our neckband now, and we're looking at it from the right side. I think the wrong side is also equally attractive, and it would be interesting to knit it with this is the right side also. Anyway, just a wee close-up of what our edge looks like so you can get an idea of whether yours also looks the same. So this is our bind off edge there, and just looking at it from the right side, that's what it's going to look like.